Hey guys, it's taking me a while because I have to upgrade Zoom. It always happens. Right, I'm going to claim the host.
How's it going, Joe? It's good to see you.
Hey David. Here. Hey James, are you in the Teams event today?
Yeah, so yesterday, my mother-in-law, who's been staying with us, tested positive for COVID, and um,
Oh,
I kind of have like had a sore throat last night, so decided I haven't tested positive, but I decided it wasn't really worth spreading anything.
stay at home.
Yeah, so I'm logged in. They haven't started yet. I don't know.
We'll give another 2 minutes to allow the folks to come in. Then we can get started. We have three open discussion items today. The component model in Wasm time, Shim v3, and merging continuity Wasm Shim's repo discussion. And James, I assume you want to discuss the Shim authoring and Shim removing policies in RunWASI, where we have a draft here for that.
Yeah, I was gonna put that on there. It's very closely related to containerd shims repo discussion.
All right, let's jump in and get started. And share my screen. Hey everyone, welcome to the RunWASI and Continuity Wasm Shim's community meeting. And this meeting happens once per 2 weeks at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And in this meeting, let's see the recurring topics. First, we want to welcome new members who attend this. Presumably, I assume everyone knows each other in this meeting at this moment, so skip that. Hey Sven, please add your name to the attendee list above, which is here. Just add your name and the company name. And because this is a community meeting, we have to abide by the CNCF community meeting code of conduct. If you have any questions, please use the raise the hand feature in Zoom and just be nice to each other. Cool. Let's move on to the open discussions. We have four items today. First one is component model in Wasm time. This is an issue which I raised to support the Wasm component model in the Wasm time shim, because Wasm time currently is the only runtime that supports YZP2 and the component model. So this is kind of like a special case to adding a feature for Wasm time shim. And we assume if there are multiple runtimes, including Wasm Edge and Wasm Mer, if they support a component model, this proposal would also extend to other runtimes as well. So to give you some motivations first, the component model is a WebAssembly proposal standardized in W3C to define a low-level portable interface between a new binary format for the WebAssembly modules, and they call it components. You can compose components together to form a bigger component. And the biggest advantage of a component is they are described by higher level types called weight. So instead of passing the pointer types between WASM modules, you can pass high level types like string, records, and etc. And they define those interfaces and they group them together in call them a world. So this proposal itself is specified. We want to support the YZCI command world, which is a POSIX-like behavior that exports a main function. They call it run function, and including all the system APIs like the clocks and file system access, sockets, etc. So I have a draft PR. Oh, it's no longer draft. It's already ready to review. And thank you, James, for reviewing it. So this PR 401, I'll send the link to the chat. Adds the WASM component support into the WASM time machine. Basically, it toggles on the component model feature for that crate. And it basically uses different sets of APIs to create a store, a linker, and loading the component, and eventually run the component. And the logic pretty much is very similar to how we do WASM module execution in WASM time today. So maybe I will point you some important bits of code to explain the high-level ideas. So far, before I go into the details, do we have any questions regarding the proposal itself? Cool, let's go ahead. I don't want to spend too much time on the details here. Feel free to review the PR, but the important bits here is we have a YZ context that includes both YZ Preview 1 and Preview 2 context. So this, as part of the requirement of this proposal, we want to be fully backward compatible with supporting both YZP2 and YZP1 and component model. So the shim is able to run both WASM modules as well as WASM components. And in order to do that, we have a way to differentiate a component from a module. So that's in here. We have a new WASM binary type. And given the binary bytes, we will be able to parse the component, or we'll be able to tell if it's a component or a WASM module or something else. So given this, we were able to determine the YZ context we were going to use. And eventually, we have a dispatch here based on the WASM binary type to execute either module or a component. I assume we are familiar with execution of the module, so I will skip that. But the important parts in executing a component is I did kind of a trick here, which I want to highlight to all of you. The trick is that YZ Preview 2 command world exports a run function, but YZ Preview 1, the module, has a start function to kind of like acting as a main function. So the trick I did here is if the function name is _star, which is populated by default, if the user doesn't specify any function names, we are going to use the command generated by the weights to instantiate the component. So it gives us a command, and the command exports a call run function, which we can call that and execute that. If the function is not _star, then we do the normal thing. We instantiate the linker and then get instance of that function and call that function. But this is a major limitation, as you can see here. The arguments of calling arbitrary function is empty. So we do not have a way to call arbitrary functions with arguments. We just assume them are empty. David. the question?
Yes. It's and we don't just like look at the module and just say, hey, are you shaped like this?
David, I
Hey,
can't-
We missed the,
okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, I'll speak louder. I'm so sorry. So it would be really nice if we were able to poke at the module and be able to say, or the component, and be able to say, hey, do you implement this interface? Like, I think about it as like go and when you're interrogating an object to see if it actually, implements a given interface, you basically take that object dot open and interface name close. And if you get an object back, then you have your interface that's implemented. And so you could call that. And that, obviously, that's that's a lot of syntactical sugar around that just to see if, do those virtual funcs line up and do I have those in my function table to execute? So I wonder if there's anything that we could do to make that kind of behavior possible. So like, hey, do you implement command? If you do, cool. Or do you implement reactor? If you do, awesome. We should, poke reactor. Each one of those, like maybe there's like three. I see like three different entry points, right? You have like HTTP serve, and that's a well-known entry point. And then you have say the command, and command's a well-known entry point, and then you have reactor plus whatever. I don't know. What do folks think?
yeah, I mean, I think when Joe and I were chatting about this offline, that's exactly what we came up with as well. And I think this is the first iteration of that. So, Sven, you had your hand up.
Yeah, but was not completely related to this. Can we use reactor functions with WASI Preview 1? Or did we remove that?
Can we use the reactor function? What do you mean by that? Oh, you mean underscore
in the once we had in the entry point the hash sign, and then you can specify the method you would start if it's not underscore start. Is this still possible, or did we remove that?
It's still possible. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I can even show you where that is. So in the execute module, which is preview 1, we have instance get function of arbitrary function. So that's parsed from where you have a hashtag of function in. But again, the limitation is the arguments here. But to your point, David, and I think your intuition is right that in the near future, almost all the components will either use one of the two worlds. One is WASI CLI, the POSIX-like behaviors, and one is WASI HTTP. And those two are the, the two of the standardized words released by WASI Preview 2. So I think it makes much sense to just treat them as special cases by poking into the components and see if they reconcile with one of the two words. But just a warning here, the words itself has a version number attached to it. So even though it's reconciled with, the shape of the component looks like one of the word, but the version might not be one of the versions we support at runtime. So that's a tricky thing to do. Do you want to support multiple versions or single version? And another point I want to make is, even though the component may reconcile to a specific word like WASI CLI command, but do we still want to be able to call arbitrary function of that component? So for example, it might export a few functions that the user wants to be able to invoke instead of the wrong function.
I could see that being used, like I ship this module and I use it as an init container, and this exported function that I want to just do the initialization on something and then the next function. But I don't actually have a use case, but that's the one that pops into my head for that.
Yeah.
Thing.
It's all speculative. So okay, one more point. This PR itself is scoped to only support the YZCI command word, and I have raised another issue, which I can also show you, to support YZHTTP proxy world in Wasm shim. And together with the PR I was talking about, we can do this smart kind of matching logic to determine which word the component is targeting at and do kind of automatic switching runtime thing. But as the issue points out, I'm not entirely sure if we should do Wasm serve in the Wasm shim, or should we just make a new shim for that? Because that feels like a very different, that feels like it's a HTTP server instead of running POSIX main program in the Wasm shim we support today. So it's more like a spin shim if we support Wasm serve.
That was exactly what it reminds me of.
Right? And Sven, did you see that the cool demo? I was able to run a Go HTTP component in both the Wasm spin shim. Not the shim, but spin runtime, like switching runtime at the back end. That was pretty cool.
Wow. No, sorry, didn't see that, but I'm totally curious.
I'll send you a link for that. All right, so that's the main bits of the component model in Wasm. Do you have any questions regarding this feature? Nope. All right, moving on. We have shim v3 support. I forgot if I raised this thing in the community meeting, but I have not have much time to go into the details of Sandboxer APIs. I know this is a new thing for the Containerd shim v3, and they had a huge announcement in the KubeCon as well. I watched some of their videos, and Brian raised this issue. I wanted to take this issue and take a look how to implement the sandboxers. Apparently, they already have the API support in the Rust extensions, so that was very nice. But other than that, I don't have too much to provide to this meeting at the moment. Is there any specific things we want to discuss over the Sandboxer APIs?
Just want to say I really appreciate that, because the shared mode is pretty error prone and usually it doesn't work really well. So replacing that with the Sandboxer and making it real a shared runtime, it's something that will hopefully boost performance and reduce overhead of the overall system.
Yeah, appreciate. Hey, David.
Hey, is anybody well enough versed with the API to kind of go over it and just verbally explain so that, you know, it's part of the video perhaps?
I have not.
Okay, good. All right. So let's consider that and maybe you know, take a look at it again next time around. Just it would be nice perhaps for, you know, folks that look at this stuff in perpetuity to say, oh yeah, that's a good explanation. I understand it better now.
We can definitely keep that in mind for next time.
Yeah, because I'm not the person either.
But I'm glad that you raised that. It's important to explain why we need to implement something like this in the first place. Don't we have
Well, I can maybe answer that. I can't, I don't know the API specifically.
go
But
ahead.
essentially the new like Sandboxer allows you to abstract away creating a sandbox API, like a sandbox container. And so like in Kubernetes, essentially what you have is you have an initial container called the sandbox, or oh, there's another name for it too. Several different, what's that?
Pause container.
The pause container, yes. So sandbox or pause container. There's maybe even another word that people use out there for this container, and it's supposed to be transparent in the Kubernetes way of viewing a pod. But essentially it's there to create the network namespace and hold it open while you add your actual workloads to those. And so in Linux, that's pretty simple. It's like just a little process that you run, and it's just doing nothing. In Windows, that's a huge process. It actually contains 17 different processes. And so it takes up a ton of memory. And all you're doing for that is to hold it open. In our case in WASM, we have baked it out. When we call into the runwazi shim, we have created a fake task that creates that pretends that it created a container and then responds back to containerd. And so to abstract away that even further, they've introduced the sandbox API. And so you can now containerd will call it the sandbox API. It can do whatever it needs to do, return back, and then we'll start to add the containers in. And so that's kind of, they're making that an explicit API versus this, initial call to a container to create a container, and then you return it back. If you wanted it to be a sandbox API, you do whatever you want there. So this is creating an explicit API that does that so that you can hide away those details. And in the Windows case, we get to drop all of that nonsense because we don't need it. And in our case, we can now don't need to have that special cased container create that we have in there right now, which is like our, I think it's called like a no-op container, if you've seen that in the code base.
And as far as I know, the Quasar project is relying on this API, and they have already implemented different sandboxers. For example, also a WASM sandboxer that currently supports WASM Time and WASM Edge.
Cool. I didn't know that. Thanks for sharing. Okay, okie dokie. Let's move on to merging containerd WASM shims repo discussion. And before we do that, James, do you want to take a role to go over the shim removing and updating policies?
Sure. So I think when you proposed this in Slack, one of the concerns I had was just around the maintenance burden for developers that want to add functionality to runwazi and essentially to the rest of the shims. And so I adjust that through the contributor MD. So I put a little bit of guidance, like, start with the shim that you know how to, and then add them to the other ones. And if you're making major changes across the shims, like reach out to us, because I think something's probably going wrong, because we should be putting most changes here into runwazi, and there shouldn't be a ton of changes in the initial shims. But another concern was around if we add a bunch of new shims, say in 6 months, how do we start to drop some of these shims? This is a fast moving ecosystem, and so some of these shims may not live forever. And so I wanted to make sure that we had something documented so that we can have a process for doing this, and we don't, annoy anybody by just saying, oh, we removed this shim, and someone's like, well, why did you remove it? How did you remove it? I want to get ahead of that and make sure we have a process at least documented. And so that's what this is, an attempt to add a process here. So this isn't necessarily perfect, but I open it up for folks to take a look and give some feedback. I think the main thing was, you know, identifying like if something isn't being maintained, whether it's the runtime itself upstream or downstream, I don't know which way that is. If that runtime just, you know, doesn't get any more commits, then we should potentially remove it. If there's nothing, like there's no maintenance inside Runwazi beyond like adding new features, and one of those features starts to fail, or you know, the tests start to fail. So like CI starts to flake on one of the shims, and nobody's helping maintain that, then that's another way to potentially get this removed. And then there's a process to actually remove it, so that, you know, we try to notify people. We create an issue on the repository, we pin it to the top, and then we also drop into Slack. We drop it there, and we do a best effort to know the people that we knew that were the maintainers. And then over a month, if nobody shows up to say, I can help here and do this, then we can delete that shim. And I've just seen this in other projects where they delete something, and then everybody's like, why did you delete that? I'm just trying to avoid that type of thing, and just so that we have a process so that people are aware when they add a new shim. So and then I just also added something about adding new shims around, you know, this is the WASI, or this is Runwazi, and so we expect shims to eventually conform with some type of WASI, with the WASI spec. And so at some point we may want to, there's an issue that I think Ralph opened up that says we may want to start running some sort of WASI compliance against that. Not that we're doing it right now, but potentially in the future. So that's a quick summary of what this is about. Go ahead, Joe.
One comment regarding raising the issue and removing the shim here. I was wondering a scenario where you have okay, so say one of the shim is not maintained for a long time, and we develop some new features, and that new feature was not added to that shim because it requires some human efforts. And so the CI would apparently fail because the CI runs all the tests through all the shims. If that happens, do we just remove the shim from the CI if that CI fails and no one is fixing the shim? Like what do we do in this what do we in the scenario where it requires immediate actions from the shim maintainers?
Yeah, so that's a good question. You could write that up on the issue just so we can document it. I think that would be, or like just ask that question there. But I think, you know, if there's a reason to quickly resolve this and we can't, for whatever reason, we can't resolve it on our own, and we need the runtime maintainers for some reason, we could potentially remove it temporarily, open up an issue and start this process. Or just, you know, or if they're like, hey, we can't help right now, but we can help in 2 weeks, you know, remove it, come back in 2 weeks. But we need to have some sort of like tracking issue to do that type of thing, so that we track how long this has been taking. And, you know, we don't want to remove something and then it starts to fall further and further and further behind. I'd rather just remove it and start fresh almost. But I don't know if other people have ideas or.
And another thing I want to point out is when you say removing the shim, I presumably assumed you were talking about deleting the code from the repo. Alternatively, I was thinking maybe so in cargo.toml, you can either specify continuity wasm shim create dependency on a local path or on a remote version of that core crate. So instead of depending on a local path, we can toggle that to depend on the last version of the continuity wasm shim crate that the shim still works. And we can treat that as like an immutable source of code, and we don't touch it anymore. So effectively, we archive that shim.
How about really archiving it? So moving it to another repository where the archived shims live for documentation and that you can just look them up?
I guess my take on this is that Git is an archive. And so if you just delete it, you can always go back to the tag or the branch that we had it in, and you essentially got an archive. And then we don't have to have other processes. But
How is the other side of, for example, getting into this repository, something like a sandbox repository where you just can create something and prove that it's working, maintained, and maybe used? Or would it be that you create it in a third-party repository, and if it's, I would say, chosen to get into this repository, it's moved when it fits the criteria?
I think this kind of dovetails into what Joe wanted to talk about with merging the containerd WASM shims.
Yeah, I think the primary reason I want to merge that repo was because that repo has a different CI and CD pipelines. And then whenever I release something on the runwise repo, I also do want to release the Spring shims, slide shim, and the WASM worker server shim. And they do have a dependency on the runwise repo itself. So it would be great for those continuity WASM shims to depend on a local version of the continuity WASM shim core crate. And so they can get the new features automatically without having me to make a PR to bump the versions of the release version of continuity wasm shims. And the second reason is the release pipeline is a little bit different and it's not as robust. I was talking both the CI and CD pipelines, not as robust as the runwise pipelines due to some of the extensive work efforts that Jorge had done to the infrastructure of runwise. That was amazing. I was porting some of the CI from runwise to continuity wasm shims repo, and I just feel like that was a little bit too much work and overhead to keep the two repos in parity, basically. And due to the fact whenever I release runwise, I also want to release the other repo. I feel like they should go into the same repo. So I just click one, I just create one tag, go ahead, and everything release at the same time. So that's the main driving motivation for this proposal. But I'm hearing folks have some concerns over the increasing complexity and not sure how to deal with adding new shims, removing new shims. But thank you, James, for adding this guidance. I feel like it's much more confident to say how are we going to handle this case. And this is much more future-proofing than what we have today.
Yeah, I think there's a trade-off here. It's easier for us as maintainers to do that type of thing. I think it puts a little bit of overhead on like a new maintainer to have to make a change across 6 or 7 different runtimes that they may not know about, right? Technically, they should be pretty minor changes, but like, in particular, as they get more complex, like spin, there could be quite a bit of overhead and knowledge that you need to know there. But I don't have, like, I'm not totally against it. I just want something like this in place and just to be aware. But then, you know, the conversation here brought up like, is there a place to sandbox these things? And that was kind of what Containerd shim WASM shims was. And so like, dude, we lose that too, but I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is.
And Stan, I want to hear your feedback on this because I know that you have done so many shims. You have added the UK shim and shim for other runtimes as well. So what do you think about this?
About the removing process per se?
Merging
Or-
them.
Merging them. Okay. Sure. So we all know that with more projects, the pipeline isn't faster. So especially the testing will take longer. So I definitely see these concerns. That's okay. I really like this. I would say a playground where you just can create a shim for something totally exotic and don't need to maintain it, but it still can be found. So what I have in my personal repository is nobody will come across that and say, oh, wow, this Vazero shim. I had no idea that I need it, but it's cool. So therefore, I really like that even with lower requirements than the Containerd WASM shim repo, because the shims in there need to work, they need to pass the test, so they are quite good in quality. But I really like to have something like a playground where you can just share shims. Maybe somebody cares, maybe not. But I think that's totally different from this discussion. So when it's just about merging them, I totally see your point. Whenever you release a new WASI version, you need to adapt all the shims in the other repo as well. And yeah, so the CI pipeline is something, tedious to maintain. So if something breaks, it's always a little bit try and error. Hard to say. See both points. If we can put the shims in one repository and it works, everybody will be happy. On the other hand, maybe I'm not sure if we can do something with not rebuilding the shims if the code hasn't changed or something like that. But if you have changed the run WASI, you've changed basically code in all of the because it's dependent. So not easy.
Yeah, I wonder if we can, instead of depending on the local version, depending on a released version in all the shims in the run WASI repo, and we just do a batch updates whenever we feel it's needed. But we can keep iterating the core crate without having to touch any of the shims in run WASI repo. But the downside, obviously, the shims are not up to date. But I think we can do that like at a very stable release schedule, and before we release something, we do a batch updates to all the shims. David.
It's
I
probably
just-
easier. I'm sorry, pardon.
Oh, I realized I kept my hands raising for a long time. Let me just lower that.
It's probably easier as well for releasing too. When you try to release them all at the same time and they're ordered releases, you know, especially when you're building those cargo packages, it's kind of a pain in the butt. Having releases of the run WASI core module or core packages, and then updating them afterwards is probably simpler release cycle.
How would the dev flow look like for that? Because basically I'm modifying run WASI or like the core library and WASM time, and that's how I typically do it because I know WASM time the best. And then I add in the features to the other shims. So I would want at least one that I was like iterating against personally. So I think I guess my thought is like, I think no one has major objections to merging some of these shims in. And so I would say, let's try it out and go forward, especially if we have something like some guidance and things like that. And if it becomes a problem, then we can readdress it. Maybe it won't be a problem at all, right? Like I'd rather move fast. Everything's moving fast, so I'd rather just try something, and if it doesn't work, we can reevaluate. I just wanted to make sure that we had some of the awareness of like some of the challenges from a new developer, because I was recently a new developer, and it took a while for me, like when I first approached a project, just to get like, I got Wasm Time up and running really quick, but Wasm Edge took me forever. I was installing things weren't working, and I know Jorge has done a ton of work to improve that process, but I just assume it'll be the same for other ones as well. So.
Yeah, he has done a tremendous work to make a static linker binary available for Wasm Edge. Cool. Like it. I think I'm just going to go ahead and merge something into the runwise repo and see how it goes. We can always refer back a process if we want. And do we have any more questions regarding these PR? And James, I'll make sure that I wrote down my thoughts on the previous points I made to this PR as a comment.
Yeah, so it's not buried in a video somewhere. We can always go back and be like, hey, Joe made that awesome point. And we should have listened to him.
Cool. Do we have any other discussion items? Otherwise, we'll just call for the end of the meeting. Back everyone 10 minutes back. Cool. See you next week. Have a good day. See you.
Bye.